But their shout was more a question than a statement. For as yet, they could only hope he was the one foretold as the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer world. Their attention was focused too on the mother, because they had heard she was a Bene Gesserit, and it was obvious to them that she was like the other Lisan al-Gaib. From Manual of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irula.
It was a green-walled enclosure with, in addition to the table, 3 suspensor chairs from which the Harkonnen H had been hastily removed, leaving an imperfect color patch. The chairs are liberated, but quite safe, Howard said. Where is Paul, sire? I left him in the conference room. I'm hoping he'll get some rest without me there to distract him. Howard nodded, crossed to the door to the adjoining room, closed it, shutting off the noise of static and electronic sparking. Thufir, Leto said, the Imperial and Harkonnen stockpiles of spice attract my attention. My lord? The Duke pursed his lips. Storehouses are susceptible to destruction. He raised a hand as Howard started to speak. Ignore the Emperor's hoard. He'd secretly enjoy it if the Harkonnens were embarrassed. And can the Baron object if something is destroyed which he cannot openly admit that he has? Howard shook his head. We've few men to spare, sire. Use some of Idaho's men, and perhaps some of the Fremen would enjoy a trip off-planet. A raid on Gedi Pride. There are tactical advantages to such a diversion, Thufir. As you say, my lord. Howard turned away, and the Duke saw evidence of nervousness in the old man, thought, perhaps he suspects I distrust him. He must know I've private reports of traitors. Well, best quiet his fears immediately. Thufir, he said, since you're one of the few I can trust completely, there's another matter bears discussion. We both know how constant a watch we must keep to prevent traitors from infiltrating our forces. But I have 2 new reports. Howard turned, stared at him, and Leto repeated the stories Paul had brought. Instead of bringing on the intense mentat concentration, the reports only increased Howard's agitation. Leto studied the old man and presently said, You've been holding something back, old friend. I should have suspected when you were so nervous during staff. What is it that was too hot to dump in front of the full conference? Howard's sappho-stained lips were pulled into a prim, straight line with tiny wrinkles radiating into them. They maintained their wrinkled stiffness as he said, My lord, I don't quite know how to broach this. We've suffered many a scar for each other, Thufir, the Duke said. You know you can broach any subject with me. Howard continued to stare at him, thinking, This is how I like him best. This is the man of honor who deserves every bit of my loyalty and service. Why must I hurt him? Well, Leto demanded. Howard shrugged. It's a scrap of a note. We took it from a Harkonnen courier. The note was intended for an agent named Pardee. We've good reason to believe Pardee was top man in the Harkonnen underground here. The note, it's a thing that could have great consequence or no consequence. It's susceptible to various interpretations. What's the delicate content of this note? Scrap of a note, my lord, incomplete. It was on mini-mic film with the usual destruction capsule attached. We stopped the acid action just short of full erasure, leaving only a fragment. The fragment, however, is extremely suggestive. Yes? Howard rubbed at his lips. It says, Ito will never suspect. And when the blow falls on him from a beloved hand, its source alone should be enough to destroy him. The note was under the Baron's own seal, and I've authenticated the seal. Your suspicion is obvious, the Duke said, and his voice was suddenly cold. I'd sooner cut off my arms than hurt you, Howard said. My lord, what if... The Lady Jessica, Leto said, and he felt anger consuming him. Couldn't you wring the facts out of this party? Unfortunately, Bardi no longer was among the living when we intercepted the courier. The courier, I'm certain, did not know what he carried. Let's see. Leto shook his head, thinking, what a slimy piece of business. There can't be anything in it. I know my woman. My lord, if... No, the Duke barked. There's a mistake here that we cannot ignore it, my lord. She's been with me for 16 years. There have been countless opportunities for... You yourself investigated the school and the woman. Howard spoke bitterly. Things have been known to escape me. It's impossible, I tell you. The Harkonnens want to destroy the Atreides line, meaning Paul too. They've already tried once. Could a woman conspire against her own son? Perhaps she doesn't conspire against her son. And yesterday's attempt could have been a clever sham. It couldn't have been a sham. Sire, she isn't supposed to know her parentage, but what if she does know? What if she were an orphan, say, orphaned by an Atreides? She'd have moved long before now. Poison in my drink, a stiletto at night. Who has had better opportunity? The Harkonnens mean to destroy you, my lord. Their intent is not just to kill. There's a range of fine distinctions in Conley. This could be a work of art among vendettas. The Duke's shoulders slumped. He closed his eyes, looking old and tired. It cannot be, he thought. The woman has opened her heart to me. What better way to destroy me than to sow suspicion of the woman I love? He asked. An interpretation I've considered, Howard said. Still... The Duke opened his eyes, stared at Howard, thinking, let him be suspicious. Suspicion is his trade, not mine. Perhaps if I appear to believe this, that will make another man careless. What do you suggest? The Duke whispered. For now, constant surveillance, my lord. She should be watched at all times. I will see it's done unobtrusively. Idaho would be the ideal choice for the job. Perhaps in a week or so we can bring him back. There's a young man we've been training in Idaho's troop who might be ideal to send to the Fremen as a replacement. He's gifted in diplomacy. Don't jeopardize our foothold with the Fremen. Of course not, sir. And what about Paul? Perhaps we could alert Dr. Yueh. Leto turned his back on Howard. I leave it in your hands. I shall use discretion, my lord. At least I can count on that, Leto thought. And he said, I will take a walk. If you need me, I'll be within the perimeter. The guard can... My lord, before you go, I've a film clip you should read. It's a first approximation analysis on the Fremen religion. You'll recall you asked me to report on it. The Duke paused, spoke without turning. Will it not wait? Of course, my lord. You asked what they were shouting, though. It was Mahdi. They directed the term at the young master when they... At Paul? Yes, my lord. They've a legend here, a prophecy, that a leader will come to them, child of a Bene Gesserit, to lead them to true freedom. It follows the familiar Messiah pattern. They think Paul is this... They only hope, my lord. Howard extended a film clip capsule. The Duke accepted it, thrust it into a pocket. I'll look at it later. Certainly, my lord. Right now, I need time to think. Yes, my lord. The Duke took a deep, sighing breath, strode out the door. He turned to his right, down the hall, began walking, hands behind his back, paying little attention to where he was. There were corridors and stairs and balconies and halls, people who saluted and stood aside for him. In time, he came back to the conference room, found it dark, and Paul asleep on the table with a guard's robe thrown over him and a ditty pack for a pillow. The Duke walked softly down the length of the room and onto the balcony overlooking the landing field. A guard at the corner of the balcony, recognizing the Duke by the dim reflection of lights from the field, snapped to attention. "At ease," the Duke murmured. He leaned against the cold metal of the balcony rail. A pre-dawn hush had come over the desert basin. He looked up. Straight overhead, the stars were a sequined shawl flung over blue-black. Low on the southern horizon, the night's second moon peered through a thin dust haze, an unbelieving moon that looked at him with a cynical light. As the Duke watched, the moon dipped beneath the shield wall cliffs, frosting them, and in the sudden intensity of darkness, he experienced a chill. He shivered. Anger shot through him. The Harkonnens have hindered and hounded and hunted me for the last time, he thought. They are dung heaps with village provost minds. Here I make my stand. And he thought with a touch of sadness, I must rule with eye and claw, as the hawk among lesser birds. Unconsciously, his hand brushed the hawk emblem on his tunic. To the east, the night grew a faggot of luminous gray, then seashell opalescence that dimmed the stars. There came the long, bell-tolling movement of dawn striking across a broken horizon. It was a scene of such beauty, it caught all his attention. Some things beggar likeness, he thought. He had never imagined anything here could be as beautiful as that shattered red horizon and the purple and ochre cliffs. Beyond the landing field, where the night's faint dew had touched life into the hurried seeds of Arrakis, he saw great puddles of red blooms, and running through them, an articulate tread of violet, like giant footsteps. "It's a beautiful morning, sire," the guard said. "Yes, it is." The Duke nodded, thinking, perhaps this planet could grow on one. Perhaps it could become a good home for my son. Then he saw the human figures moving into the flower fields, sweeping them with strange, scythe-like devices, dew-gatherers. Water so precious here that even the dew must be collected. And it could be a hideous place, the Duke thought.
There is probably no more terrible instant of enlightenment than the one in which you discover your father is a man with human flesh. From Collected Sayings of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan.
The Duke said, "Paul, I'm doing a hateful thing, but I must." He stood beside the portable poison snooper that had been brought into the conference room for their breakfast. The thing's sensor arms hung limply over the table, reminding Paul of some weird insect newly dead. The Duke's attention was directed out the windows at the landing field and its roiling of dust against the morning sky. Paul had a viewer in front of him containing a short film clip on Fremen religious practices. The clip had been compiled by one of Howat's experts, and Paul found himself disturbed by the references to himself. Mahdi, Lisan al-Gaib. He could close his eyes and recall the shouts of the crowds. So that is what they hope, he thought. And he remembered what the old Reverend Mother had said, Kwisatz Haderach. The memories touched his feelings of terrible purpose, shading this strange world with sensations of familiarity that he couldn't understand. "A hateful thing," the Duke said. "What do you mean, sir?" Leto turned, looked down at his son. "Because the Harkonnens think to trick me by making me distrust your mother. They don't know that I'd sooner distrust myself." "I don't understand, sir." Again, Leto looked out the windows. The white sun was well up into its morning quadrant. Milky light picked out a boiling of dust clouds that spilled over into the blind canyons, interfingering the shield wall. Slowly, Speaking in a slow voice to contain his anger, the Duke explained to Paul about the mysterious note. "You might just as well mistrust me," Paul said. "They have to think they've succeeded," the Duke said. "They must think me this much of a fool. It must look real. Even your mother may not know the sham." "But, sir, why?" "Your mother's response must not be an act. Oh, she's capable of a supreme act, but too much rides on this. I hope to smoke out a traitor. It must seem that I've been completely cozened. She must be hurt this way, that she does not suffer greater hurt." "Why do you tell me, Father? Maybe I'll give it away." "They'll not watch you in this thing," the Duke said. "You'll keep the secret. You must." He walked to the windows, spoke without turning. "This way, if anything should happen to me, you can tell her the truth. That I never doubted her. Not for the smallest instant. I should want her to know this." Paul recognized the death thoughts in his father's words. Spoke quickly. "Nothing's going to happen to you, sir. Be silent, son." Paul stared at his father's back, seeing the fatigue in the angle of the neck, in the line of the shoulders, in the slow movements. "You're just tired, Father." "I am tired," the Duke agreed. "I'm morally tired. The melancholy degeneration of the great houses has afflicted me at last, perhaps. And we were such strong people once." Paul spoke in quick anger. "Our house hasn't degenerated, hasn't it?" The Duke turned, faced his son, revealing dark circles beneath hard eyes, a cynical twist of mouth. He shrugged. Mother has explained this to me. Nothing wins more loyalty for a leader than an air of bravura," the Duke said. "I, therefore, cultivate an air of bravura." "You lead well," Paul protested. "You govern well. Men follow you willingly and love you." "My propaganda corps is one of the finest," the Duke said. Again he turned to stare out at the basin. "There's greater possibility for us here on Arrakis than the Imperium could ever suspect. Yet sometimes I think it'd have been better if we'd run for it, gone renegade. Sometimes I wish we could sink back into anonymity among the people, become less exposed to..." "Father?" "Yes, I am tired," the Duke said. "Did you know we're using spice residue as raw material and already have our own factory to manufacture film base?" "Sir?" "We mustn't run short of film base," the Duke said. "Else how could we flood village and city with our information? The people must learn how well I govern them. How would they know if we didn't tell them?" "You should get some rest," Paul said. Again the Duke faced his son. "Arrakis has another advantage I almost forgot to mention. Spice is in everything here. You breathe it and eat it in almost everything. And I find that this imparts a certain natural immunity to some of the most common poisons of the Assassin's Handbook. And the need to watch every drop of water puts all food production, yeast culture, hydroponics, chemovite, everything under the strictest surveillance. We cannot kill off large segments of our population with poison. And we cannot be attacked this way either. Arrakis makes us moral and ethical." Paul started to speak. "That honorable banner could come to mean many evil things." Paul swallowed in a dry throat. His father's words carried futility, a sense of fatalism that left the boy with an empty feeling in his chest. The Duke took an anti-fatigue tablet from a pocket, gulped it dry. "Power and fear," he said. "The tools of statecraft. I must order new emphasis on guerrilla training for you. That film clip there, they call you Mahdi, Lisan al-Gaib, as a last resort. You might capitalize on that." Paul stared at his father, watching the shoulders straighten as the tablet did its work, but remembering the words of fear and doubt. "What's keeping that ecologist?" the Duke muttered. "I told Thufir to have him here early.
father, the Padishah Emperor, took me by the hand one day, and I sensed in the ways my mother had taught me that he was disturbed. He led me down the hall of portraits to the ego likeness of the Duke Leto Atreides. I marked the strong resemblance between them, my father and this man in the portrait, both with thin, elegant faces and sharp features dominated by cold eyes. "Princess daughter," my father said, "I would that you had been older when it came time for this man to choose a woman." My father was 71 at the time, and looking no older than the man in the portrait, and I was but 14. Yet I remember deducing in that instant that my father secretly wished the Duke had been his son, and disliked the political necessities that made them enemies. In my father's house, by Princess Irulan.
His first encounter with the people he had been ordered to betray left Dr. Kynes shaken. He prided himself on being a scientist to whom legends were merely interesting clues, pointing toward cultural roots. Yet the boy fitted the ancient prophecy so precisely. He had the questing eyes and the air of reserved candor. Of course, the prophecy left certain latitude as to whether the mother goddess would bring the Messiah with her or produce him on the scene. Still, there was this odd correspondence between prediction and persons. They met in mid-morning outside the Araking Landing Field's administration building. An unmarked ornithopter squatted nearby, humming softly on standby like a somnolent insect. An Atreides guard stood beside it with bared sword and the faint air distortion of a shield around him. Kynes sneered at the shield pattern, thinking, Arrakis has a surprise for them there. The planetologist raised a hand, signaled for his Fremen guard to fall back. He strode on ahead toward the building's entrance, the dark hole in plastic-coated rock. So exposed, that monolithic building, he thought. So much less suitable than a cave. Movement within the entrance caught his attention. He stopped, taking the moment to adjust his robe and the set of his stillsuit at the left shoulder. The entrance doors swung wide. Atreides guards emerged swiftly, all of them heavily armed, slow pellet stunners, swords and shields. Behind them came a tall man, hawk-faced, dark of skin and hair. He wore a Jubba cloak with Atreides crest at the breast, and wore it in a way that betrayed his unfamiliarity with the garment. The youth seemed small for the 15 years Kynes knew him to have, but the young body carried a sense of command, a poised assurance, as though he saw and knew things all around him that were not visible to others. And he wore the same style cloak as his father, yet with casual ease that made one think the boy had always worn such clothing. The Mahdi will be aware of things others cannot see, went the prophecy. Kynes shook his head, telling himself, with the two, garbed like them for the desert, came a man Kynes recognized, Gurney Halleck. Kynes took a deep breath to still his resentment against Halleck, who had briefed him on how to behave with the Duke and ducal heir. You may call the Duke my lord or sire. Noble-born also is correct, but usually reserved for more formal occasions. The son may be addressed as young master or my lord. The Duke is a man of much leniency, but brooks little familiarity. And Kynes thought as he watched the group approach, they'll learn soon enough who's master on Arrakis. Order me questioned half the night by that mentat, will they? Expect me to guide them on an inspection of spice mining, do they? The import of Hawat's questions had not escaped Kynes. They wanted the Imperial bases, and it was obvious they'd learned of the bases from Idaho. I will have Stilgar send Idaho's head to this Duke, Kynes told himself. The ducal party was only a few paces away now, their feet in desert boots crunching the sand. Kynes bowed. My Lord Duke. As he had approached the solitary figure standing near the ornithopter, Leto had studied him. Tall, thin, dressed for the desert in loose robe, still suit, and low boots. The man's hood was thrown back, its veil hanging to one side, revealing long, sandy hair, a sparse beard. The eyes were that fathomless blue within blue under thick brows. Remains of dark stains smudged his eye sockets. "You're the ecologist," the Duke said. "We prefer the old title here, my lord," Kynes said. "Planetologist." "As you wish," the Duke said. He glanced down at Paul. "Son, this is the judge of the change, the arbiter of dispute, the man set here to see that the forms are obeyed in our assumption of power over this fief." He glanced at Kynes. "And this is my son." "My lord," Kynes said. "Are you a Fremen?" Paul asked. Kynes smiled. "I am accepted in both Sietch and village, young master. But I am in His Majesty's service, the Imperial Planetologist." Paul nodded, impressed by the man's air of strength. Halleck had pointed Kynes out to Paul from an upper window of the administration building. "The man standing there was the Fremen escort, the one moving now toward the ornithopter." Paul had inspected Kynes briefly with binoculars, noting the prim, straight mouth, the high forehead. Halleck had spoken in Paul's ear. "Odd sort of fellow. He has a precise way of speaking, clipped off, no fuzzy edges, razor apt." And the Duke behind them had said, "Scientist type." Now, only a few feet from the man, Paul sensed the power in Kynes, the impact of personality, as though he were blood royal, born to command. "I understand we have you to thank for our still suits and these cloaks," the Duke said. "I hope they fit well, my lord," Kynes said. "They're of Fremen make, and as near as possible the dimensions given me by your man Halleck here." "I was concerned that you said you couldn't take us into the desert unless we wore these garments," the Duke said. "We can carry plenty of water. We don't intend to be out long, and we'll have air cover. The escort you see overhead right now, it isn't likely we'd be forced down." Kynes stared at him, seeing the water-fat flesh. He spoke coldly. "You never talk of likelihoods on Arrakis. You speak only of possibilities." Halleck stiffened. "The Duke is to be addressed as my lord or sire." Leto gave Halleck their private hand signal to desist, said, "Our ways are new here, Gurney. We must make allowances." "As you wish, sire." "We are indebted to you, Dr. Kynes," Leto said. "These suits and the consideration for our welfare will be remembered." On impulse, Paul called to mind a quotation from the O.C. Bible. Said, "The gift is the blessing of the river." The words rang out over loud in the still air. The Fremen escort Kynes had left in the shade of the administration building leaped up from their squatting repose, muttering in open agitation. One cried out, "Lisan al-Gaib!" Kynes whirled, gave a curt chopping signal with a hand, waved the guard away. They fell back, grumbling among themselves, trailed away around the building. "Most interesting," Leto said. Kynes passed a hard glare over the Duke, and Paul said, "Most of the desert natives here are a superstitious lot. Pay no attention to them. They mean no harm." But he thought of the words of the legend. "They will greet you with holy words, and your gifts will be a blessing." Leto's assessment of Kynes, based partly on Howat's brief verbal report, guarded and full of suspicions, suddenly crystallized. The man was Fremen. Kynes had come with a Fremen escort, which could mean simply that the Fremen were testing their new freedom to enter urban areas, but it had seemed an honor guard. And by his manner, Kynes was a proud man, accustomed to freedom. His tongue and his manner guarded only by his own suspicions. Paul's question had been direct and pertinent. Kynes had gone native. "Shouldn't we be going, sire?" Halleck asked. The Duke nodded. "I'll fly my own thopter. Kynes can sit up front with me to direct me. You and Paul take the rear seats." "One moment, please," Kynes said. "With your permission, sire, I must check the security of your suits." The Duke started to speak, but Kynes pressed on. I have concern for my own flesh as well as yours, my lord. I'm well aware of whose throat would be slit should harm befall you two while you're in my care. The Duke frowned, thinking, how delicate this moment. If I refuse, it may offend him. And this could be a man whose value to me is beyond measure. Yet, to let him inside my shield, touching my person when I know so little about him? The thoughts flicked through his mind with a decision hard on their heels. We're in your hands, the Duke said. He stepped forward, opening his robe, saw Halleck come up on the balls of his feet, poised and alert, but remaining where he was. And if you'd be so kind, the Duke said, I'd appreciate an explanation of the suit from one who lives so intimately with it. Certainly, Kynes said. He felt up under the robe for the shoulder seals, speaking as he examined the suit. It's basically a micro sandwich, a high-efficiency filter and heat exchange system. He adjusted the shoulder seals. The skin contact layer's porous. Perspiration passes through it, having cooled the body, near normal evaporation process. The next two layers, Kynes tightened the chest fit, include heat exchange filaments and salt precipitators. Salts reclaimed. The Duke lifted his arms at a gesture, said, Most interesting. Breathe deeply, Kynes said. The Duke obeyed. Kynes studied the underarm seals, adjusted one. Motions of the body, especially breathing, he said, and some osmotic action provide the pumping force. He loosened the chest fit slightly. Reclaimed water circulates to catch pockets, from which you draw it through this tube in the clip at your neck. The Duke twisted his chin in and down to look at the end of the tube. Efficient and convenient, he said. Good engineering. Kynes knelt, examined the leg seals. Urine and feces are processed in the thigh pads, he said, and stood up, felt the neck fitting, lifted a sectioned flap there. In the open desert, you wear this filter across your face. This tube in the nostrils with these plugs to ensure a tight fit. Breathe in through the mouth filter, out through the nose tube. With a Fremen suit in good working order, you won't lose more than a thimbleful of moisture a day, even if you're caught in the Great Erg. A thimbleful a day, the Duke said. Kynes pressed a finger against the suit's forehead pad, said, This may rub a little. If it irritates you, please tell me. I could slit patch it a bit tighter. My thanks, the Duke said. He moved his shoulders in the suit as Kynes stepped back, realizing that it did feel better now, tighter and less irritating. Kynes turned to Paul. Now let's have a look at you, lad. A good man, but he'll have to learn to address us properly, the Duke thought. Paul stood passively as Kynes inspected the suit. It had been an odd sensation putting on the crinkling, slick-surfaced garment. In his foreconsciousness had been the absolute knowledge that he had never before worn a still suit. Yet each motion of adjusting the adhesion tabs under Gurney's inexpert guidance had seemed natural, instinctive. When he had tightened the chest to gain maximum pumping action from the motion of breathing, he had known what he did and why. When he had fitted the neck and forehead tabs tightly, he had known it was to prevent friction blisters. Kynes straightened, stepped back with a puzzled expression. You've worn a stillsuit before, he asked. This is the first time. Then someone adjusted it for you? No. Your desert boots are fitted slip fashion at the ankles. Who told you to do that? It seemed the right way. That it most certainly is. And Kynes rubbed his cheek, thinking of the legend. He shall know your ways, as though born to them. We waste time, the Duke said. He gestured to the waiting thopter, led the way, accepting the guard's salute with a nod. He climbed in, fastened his safety harness, checked controls and instruments. The craft creaked as the others clambered aboard. Kynes fastened his harness, focused on the padded comfort of the aircraft, soft luxury of gray-green upholstery, gleaming instruments, the sensation of filtered and washed air in his lungs as doors slammed and vent fans whirred alive. So soft, he thought. All secure, sire, Halleck said. Leto fed power to the wings, felt them cup and dip once, twice. They were airborne in 10 meters, wings feathered tightly, and afterjets thrusting them upward in a steep, hissing climb. Southeast over the shield wall, Kynes said. That's where I told your Sandmaster to concentrate his equipment. Right. The Duke banked into his air cover, the other craft taking up their guard positions as they headed southeast. The design and manufacture of these still suits bespeaks a high degree of sophistication, the Duke said. Someday I may show you a Sietch factory, Kynes said. I would find that interesting, the Duke said. I note that suits are manufactured also in some of the garrison cities. Inferior copies, Kynes said. Any Dune man who values his skin wears a Fremen suit. And it'll hold your water lost to a thimbleful a day? Properly suited, your forehead cap tight, all seals in order, your major water loss is through the palms of your hands, Kynes said. You can wear suit gloves if you're not using your hands for critical work, but most Fremen in the open desert rub their hands with juice from the leaves of the creosote bush. It inhibits perspiration. The Duke glanced down to the left at the broken landscape of the shield wall. Chasms of tortured rock, patches of yellow-brown crossed by black lines of fault shattering. It was as though someone had dropped this ground from space and left it where it smashed. They crossed a shallow basin with the clear outline of gray sand spreading across it from a canyon opening to the south. The sand fingers ran out into the basin, a dry delta outlined against darker rock. Kynes sat back, thinking about the water-fat flesh he had felt beneath the stillsuits. They wore shield belts over their robes, slow pellet stunners at the waist, coin-sized emergency transmitters on cords around their necks. Both the Duke and his son carried knives in wrist sheaths, and the sheaths appeared well worn. The people struck Kynes as a strange combination of softness and armed strength. There was a poise to them totally unlike the Harkonnens. When you report to the Emperor on the change of government here, will you say we observed the rules? Leto asked. He glanced at Kynes, back to their course. The Harkonnens left, you came, Kynes said. And is everything as it should be? Leto asked. Momentary tension showed in the tightening of a muscle along Kynes' jaw. As planetologist and judge of the change, I am a direct subject of the Imperium, my lord. The Duke smiled grimly. But we both know the realities. I remind you that His Majesty supports my work. Indeed, and what is your work? In the brief silence, Paul thought, he's pushing this Kynes too hard. Paul glanced at Halleck, but the minstrel warrior was staring out at the barren landscape. Kynes spoke stiffly. You, of course, refer to my duties as planetologist. Of course. It is mostly dry land biology and botany, some geological work, core drilling and testing. You never really exhaust the possibilities of an entire planet. Do you also investigate the spice? Kynes turned, and Paul noted the hard line of the man's cheek. A curious question, my lord. Bear in mind, Kynes, that this is now my field. My methods differ from those of the Harkonnens. I don't care if you study the spice, as long as I share what you discover. He glanced at the planetologist. The Harkonnens discouraged investigation of the spice, didn't they? Kynes stared back without answering. You may speak plainly.